back to It's Not Normal, the podcast, episode 43. It's been a couple of weeks, and so I might be a little bit rusty. I'm almost like a little bit nervous. I feel like sitting down here and doing this again, but it's only been a couple of weeks, and I know that everything is going to be fine, so bear with me. But it was a good couple of weeks off. I feel like it was a much needed break, and there were a lot of other things that were going on that sort of demanded mine and Brandon's attention. And so it was really nice to be able to focus on those things. But I'm really excited to be back and to be committing an hour or so a week to just sitting down with you and diving deeper into these topics. I've missed it. And so on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about fear of relationships. And this was one of the suggestions I posted on my Instagram story maybe a week or a week and a half ago, asking for suggestions for season 3, different topics that you would like to hear me talk about. And this was one of the suggestions. And as soon as I read it, there were so many thoughts and emotions that started to make their way to the surface for me. And it really resonated with me and my experience of trauma. And so this is something that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into with you. And so we're going to be talking about different kinds of relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, our relationship to and with ourself, and how these different things can be affected by being raised by emotionally immature parents, along with some of the different things that we can do to combat those negative influences. My perspective of relationships of all kinds was completely different when I was younger, when I was still living with my parents, compared to what it is now. And I think there are a couple of different reasons for that, but a few of the things that really stand out for me. The first is when I was younger, I don't know if this was sort of a coping mechanism for me or if this was something, an idea that was introduced and continually reinforced to the point that it was something that I felt so truly, I didn't even know that I was consciously thinking it. But I didn't think that people's behaviors, their words or actions could really ever have any sort of malicious or selfish or vindictive intention behind them. And I think that could partially be from just existing in an environment where there was a lot of unhealthy behavior that didn't make me feel good. And I think when you are a child and you exist in that kind of environment, you can feel so powerless. And so maybe as a way of coping, we justify this behavior over and over and over again. And I think it can be so easy to apply that same way of thinking to other people's behavior and to always give other people the benefit of the doubt and to never think that they're ever doing anything to intentionally hurt you or manipulate you. And I think as you move throughout life and you get older, that kind of naive way of thinking can be really dangerous. And it can lead you to being taken advantage of, to neglecting yourself, and sometimes falling back into those same patterns of behavior and those same unhealthy relationships. And so now, as sad as it can sometimes be to distance yourself from how naive you might have felt throughout childhood, I feel my approach to relationships is very different. Not long after moving out of my parents' house and starting to sit with some of those emotions without fully knowing why I was experiencing them or what to call them even, I think I was subconsciously very skeptical of relationships and of other people. I think even still, I'm very aware that no matter a person's relationship to me, they are capable of hurting me in some of the most lasting ways that I could imagine. And as jaded as that might sound, I think when you experience trauma from your parents as a result of your parents' behavior, and you experience that switch where now you're seeing things for what they are for maybe the first time, it's such a drastic change in your perspective. And it can kind of feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you, because at one time, no matter how the behavior made you feel, you felt like, okay, this is my family and they want what's best for me and they love me and they care about me. So you rationalize really toxic behavior. And I think it can get to the point where you start to do this subconsciously, because these behaviors were introduced so early in your childhood that they have become your normal. And another characteristic of emotionally immature parents and emotionally unskilled families is this closed family system. And we've talked about this before, this drastic lack of perspective that you have of other people's families, of other people's relationship dynamics. You don't have much to compare it to, and you don't really have anyone to confide in. And so you're sort of stuck in this situation. And I think it might just be human nature to try to make the best of our situation. And so for me, even when there were things that, looking back now, were blatantly wrong, just obviously hurtful or manipulative, if you would have asked me in the moment, was this intentional? Was there any kind of malice behind this behavior, behind this action? I would have said no. And I think that is part of healing. And that can be an incredibly painful part of healing. Having the realization, first of all, that the people closest to you are the people that might have hurt you the most. And then coming to terms with the fact that you endured that toxicity for so long. And now that you're out of it, you might start to see so much of your childhood through a completely different, much more objective lens. And that can be a really challenging thing to sit with and a lengthy process to unpack. And so, this is one of the things that I try to sometimes turn into a positive when I think about it too much. I do think that there is value in understanding that people's intentions can be hurtful or harmful. I think there's a certain level of emotional awareness and emotional intelligence that can really help you in your interactions with all different kinds of people. I think when you exist so closely in an environment with someone who is emotionally manipulative and emotionally immature, you are exposed to some of the worst behaviors that you can imagine. And as awful as that can be to experience, once you start to realize this, you can sort of mold these different methods of self-protection that you have developed to serve you in a positive way, where maybe now you won't be taken advantage of by someone who thinks that you're naive, because maybe you are a step or two ahead. You can assess these situations a little bit more objectively without getting clouded by someone's relationship to you or by the words that they're saying to your face that their actions may not reflect. But this is something that takes time and practice, just like so many other aspects of healing. Just this past year, within the last couple of months, I was in a situation where I was being introduced to a new relationship, and completely under the radar, these different forms of self-protection and defense sort of made their way to the surface. And I found myself feeling really uncomfortable at the thought of getting to know a new person, of introducing someone new into my life and allowing them to know things about me and to share things that are important. And I have been making such a consistent effort to heal all of these different parts of myself. But I think that it's important to mention that because it speaks to how far into your journey these different things can resurface. And what's important, I think, when you find yourself in these moments is you developing and practicing this ability to recognize why you're feeling the way that you're feeling and where this is coming from. And for me, once I'm able to recognize the direct connection between these emotions that, in truth, I think more often than not for me stem from fear and my childhood trauma, that takes away a lot of their power for me. And it offers me an explanation as to what's going on. And I think for me, understanding the why has been so helpful in distancing myself from these emotions that at one time were so big and scary that I didn't feel capable of facing them. And so there can be sort of this underlying skepticism that you carry with you when the idea of other relationships, whether it's with a romantic partner or a friendship, are introduced into your life. And it's okay. I think it's important to acknowledge and to validate that skepticism and that fear that you feel, because at one time in your life that protected you. But it's also important to recognize that if you apply that fear to other relationships and to situations where there's no reason to be afraid, where you're actually going to be met with care and understanding and empathy, that can get in the way of you forming some real, genuine connections. It's a matter of allowing yourself to trust. And speaking from firsthand experience, I so deeply understand how hard that can be, especially after you existed for so long in these really vulnerable years of your life in an environment where you felt like you were constantly being watched and scrutinized, where you were always on edge and you didn't feel like you could trust anyone, like anything that you said to someone in confidence would actually remain private. And so now, having maybe experienced this intense judgment or betrayal from your parents, the thought of a complete stranger or someone that you've only known for a short period of time not doing the same seems almost foolish. And so it's important to go into new relationships open-minded and with optimism, but also with realism, to understand that there are people out there who may have their own baggage and their own trauma that they haven't realized yet, that might subconsciously be informing their own decisions that may hurt you. But as you start to develop your own self-awareness and emotional maturity, you can start to identify these things early. But if you find yourself with a friend or a romantic partner who is emotionally mature, who is consistently showing up and doing the right thing, it is okay for you to gradually let that wall down and to trust. I think every time we make the decision to trust someone, we're sort of testing our boundaries. We're making ourselves a little bit more comfortable if it goes well, and we're showing ourselves that, oh, okay, this is okay. This is safe with this person. And the more that you can do that, the more open you can allow yourself to be to relationships in general. And that's a really wonderful thing. I think so many of us grew up without this sense of camaraderie or community from our family, never mind our peers. And so it can be so wonderful as we distance ourselves from the toxicity and we start to live our own lives to discover that sense of community and camaraderie amongst our peers and to feel like we can take comfort in some of our relationships, to feel sort of like we fit somewhere. And the last thing that I want to mention about trust, especially going into maybe a romantic relationship, I know when I first met my husband, I had issues with trust. And I didn't know that at the time. That was a realization that I had probably 2 or 3 years into our relationship. And so a lot of my intrusive thoughts, a lot of my anxieties, and a lot of my more unhealthy behavior stemmed from my inability to trust others. I always wanted to be sort of one step ahead. I wanted to know what was going on all the time, who was involved, what is your relationship to them? Should I be concerned about this person, about this friend? Are they a threat to me somehow? I think I was always trying to be on the lookout for something that could either be used against me or something that could hurt me, because that's what I had grown used to, sort of always being on the defense and feeling like I had to protect myself because the other person involved might use this thing against me. They know my vulnerabilities, and so they might exploit them to try to get me to do something, and then I'm left with nothing. What's so important about this process, I think, and why healing is so crucial to genuine, healthy relationships is because if you allow this unresolved trauma to continue to inform your behavior, you may end up creating a problem that wasn't actually there in the first place. You may project these unhealthy behaviors, these things that you've experienced in the past, onto an otherwise healthy partner. And that can be so taxing on a relationship. It can be destructive even. And so it's really important for us to be able to be self-reflective and to sit with this discomfort and to understand where these different challenges come from and what we can do to kind of move through them. Something else that I realized that I think really fits in line with fear of relationships is allowing our authentic selves to be seen. I think when I was younger, when I was living with my parents, again, this is something that was so consistent in my life that it became my normal. I didn't know that I wasn't in touch with my authentic self. I didn't know that I was consistently acting as a mirror for my emotionally immature parent, and that our similarities were my parents' interests. And so I was consistently pretending to be someone other than who I truly was. I was always showing up as a version of myself that I believed would be the most agreeable to my parent, because all that mattered was making my parent happy. If they were happy, everyone was happy. And I knew that the way that I behaved could influence that. And so I would do anything in my power to try to make sure that I was playing my part. And unfortunately, for so many of us throughout childhood, we feel like our part is pleasing our parent, is appeasing them, and being the most agreeable version of ourselves for them. I have a whole episode 41 is we talk about authenticity and the fear of being seen, which is a very real challenge that so many of us face as we start to heal. And I think what's really interesting is that when you're consistently sort of showing up as a version of yourself that you know will be more favorable to the people that you're around, there isn't much room left for hurt. You can't really be made to feel bad about something that you're doing if it's not a true representation of who you are. And the chances of you being called out or made fun of if you're molding to adapt to this other person are significantly lower. Whereas when you show up as your authentic self, you have different experiences, different opinions and perspectives. There's much more opportunity for you to be hurt and to be genuinely hurt, because the things that you are expressing actually feel true to you. They sort of represent who you are. And so if someone questions you or comments negatively about something, it can feel much more real and it can last. It can sort of linger. You might think about it before you go to sleep at night. So in some ways, pretending to be this other version of yourself that you know other people may like better, because that's something that we've gotten so good at throughout childhood, is reading other people. I know you. I know the kinds of things that you like, and I know the version of me that I need to be for you to like me. There's an element of that is easier because of how detached it is from our authentic selves. But personally, and within the context of a relationship, that is not sustainable, and, in my opinion, is a form of self-neglect, Because the truth is, there are so many people out there, and we should provide them with the opportunity to get to know our true selves. And we should allow ourselves to love ourselves and feel comfortable showing up as the person that we truly are. And yet, when you're raised in an unhealthy environment, you learn very quickly that showing up as your authentic self isn't safe. It's not a safe space to do that. And I think what's so difficult about experiencing that throughout childhood is that so many of those developmental years are kind of stolen from you. You are stripped of the opportunity to explore your personality and to try these different things to discover what you like and what you don't like. And so many of us are left to begin that process of self-discovery in adulthood, which can be overwhelming, not only because of the amount of time that's passed, but because of all of the other responsibilities that you're likely juggling while having these really profound realizations. And so the first step of allowing ourselves to show up in an authentic way in a relationship is getting to know who our authentic self is. That self-discovery in and of itself is a process. And that is something that you have to do before you can truly show up as you in friendships, in romantic relationships, and ultimately form real, genuine connections. In one of the books that I've read, the author talks a lot about emotional loneliness and how so often children of emotionally immature parents experience emotional loneliness, where even with friends, you have on the surface these relationships, and maybe you're going out and you're doing things, but you don't feel fulfilled. And so much of that, I think, comes from not truly being seen and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to share our true feelings. That is when you create these genuine emotional connections, and that is so important in a relationship. And yet so many of us aren't taught that. Not only are we not taught that, but we're conditioned to believe that the opposite is favorable, that becoming a version of yourself other than who you truly are, if that's not favorable to the people that you're around, is the right thing to do. And so when you develop that mentality throughout childhood, it can sort of seamlessly make its way into your thought process in adulthood. And that will inevitably trickle down into all of your different relationships, friendships, and romantic partners alike. So it's so important for us to understand first that we are our own people, and to take the steps to start to discover who our authentic self is. And then from there, we can start to show up in friendships and in relationships as our authentic selves. We can start to develop the ability and the confidence to allow ourselves to be seen by other people and understand that we may not be well received by everyone. Not everyone may want to be our best friend. Our personalities just may not click, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you have to change who you are to better suit that person. Nothing bad is going to happen if you don't do everything to appease them. You don't have to be a people pleaser in your relationships. It just means that some people aren't meant for you, and they're helping you to find the people that are. And when you do, and you experience that acceptance, for me, that has just intensified my self-love, my ability to show myself, my authentic self, love. Because now I understand that I have value. I have inherent value just for the person that I am. And all of these different things that make me me, I should be proud of. Because I'm proud of the person that I am, and I want to show that to other people. And then, of course, there are a few other things that can really sort of contribute to our fear of relationships, like fear of abandonment. This is something that for me has gone hand in hand with separation anxiety, with people pleasing, And I think it's a really common experience for a lot of adult children of emotionally immature parents to carry with us this fear of abandonment. We talked about this sense of emotional loneliness that you feel throughout childhood because your parent is not emotionally available to you. But I, like I'm sure a lot of you, have experienced the more physical abandonment, where after an argument, a disagreement, during a stressful time, a parent might physically remove themselves for a time. They might threaten to leave and to never come back. They might stonewall you and completely shut you out and make you feel either physically or emotionally abandoned, or both in some cases. And so as we move into friendships and as we move into relationships, when we are faced with stress or controversy, any sort of conflict, I think it can be sort of second nature for us to revert back into this people-pleasing way of living and doing anything and everything in our power to be hypervigilant, to make sure that our friend or partner never gets upset with us, that we never make a mistake or do anything wrong. Because if we don't do what we're supposed to do, if we don't show up in the way that we're expected to show up, then this person who I deeply care for might leave. And that can lead to so many self-neglecting behaviors. And that is not what a healthy relationship is built on. Healthy relationships are not built on fear, but a relationship with an emotionally immature parent can be. And so making that switch in your mind that, okay, this person and I can disagree without completely disconnecting. That, okay, I can express my opinion, and even if that's different from this other person's opinion, they're not going to abandon me. They're not going to yell at me and threaten to do things that would be really hurtful to me. This is a safe space to have an open conversation and to disagree. You can learn how to compromise. In Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, Lindsay Gibson says at one point that compromise can be an enjoyable experience. And it's true. When you have two emotionally mature people whose common goals are understanding and empathy, sort of furthering the relationship and wanting the other person to feel heard and seen, compromise can be a really great, sort of satisfying exchange. And yet there is no compromise when you're dealing with an emotionally immature parent. Things are very black and white. And so opening yourself up to the existence of a gray area can feel almost counterintuitive when you've existed in such a volatile environment for so long. And yet it's necessary in relationships to understand that you should share your opinions. You can speak your mind. You can, again, sort of show up as your authentic self without the fear of abandonment. You're not going to be rejected. You're not going to be judged in the same way that you were in the past. And once you start to realize that, when you find yourself in a space safe enough to do that, again, it sort of just opens you up to taking even more steps in a positive, healthy, and open direction. Lastly, I want to talk about failure and criticism, because I think so many of us sit with this fear of failure, and I think we have sort of an interesting relationship to criticism. I know for me, throughout my childhood, I felt like it was my primary responsibility to make my parent happy and to always do the right thing, to never make a mistake or to make things more difficult than they already were. And so that is where a lot of my perfectionism stemmed from. And something that I've learned throughout healing is just how unsustainable perfectionism is. Perfectionism is not a form of self-love. I think compassion and authenticity are sort of the antidotes to perfectionism, but it's not something that you can always let go of easily. And so when you tie in all of these different things, this fear of being seen, of showing up as your authentic self, the disconnect between your authentic self and the person that you are showing up as, this fear of abandonment that so many of us carry with us. All of these things can intensify this fear of failure and of criticism, because we feel like if we make a mistake, if we do something wrong, if we are on the receiving end of any kind of criticism, then that means that our love and care and the connection that we have with this other person might be in jeopardy. And that is such a scary feeling that you will do anything to try to avoid that. For me, it's been a process, sort of systematically deconstructing this perfectionist mindset that I have developed over the course of my life, and understanding that it's okay to be seen trying, and that my relationship with my husband and with my friends, these safe spaces, are places where I can make mistakes, where I can try something and fail, where I can receive constructive criticism without the fear that this means that these other people think less of me, or that these different things that they're pointing out they might exploit or use against me when it's beneficial for them. I think so much of our apprehension towards relationships stems from self-protection and from this, what can feel like an intrinsic need to defend ourselves. Because I think what can happen when you're raised by an emotionally immature or a narcissistic parent, a parent who is emotionally manipulative and abusive, is that you feel not only powerless, but alone. And like you are constantly on edge. You have to be. You always have to be watching what you say. You always have to be watching what you do. Is someone eavesdropping? Is this thing that you told your parent in confidence actually going to be public information in the next hour or two? Are you going to be called upon to sort of divulge this really uncomfortable or personal bit of information to prove your parent's point about something in an argument? It doesn't ever feel safe. It feels like everyone, if they're not against you, they could be. And you should be wary of that, because that is a possibility. And I think why this is so challenging to let go of is because we're applying this mentality to our immediate family, to the same people who society tells us are our biggest supporters, our biggest cheerleaders, who have our best interest in mind. And so as a child, before we've developed the emotional maturity to understand that our parents are just people too, we can confuse that love and care with these really abusive behaviors, with all of these different methods of self-protection that we develop. And we can feel like it's our job to carry them into adulthood so that we don't get manipulated. And, this is only after we've realized our trauma. In the beginning of this episode, I talked about my perspective shift from when I was living with my parents to after I moved out. And the truth is, my perspective of relationships is different now, even than it was 2-3 years ago. There was a period of time before I had realized my trauma and really started to understand it, that all of these different methods of self-protection and self-defense were just subconsciously influencing my behavior and my thoughts. And it was exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting. And those were some of the things that were causing the more challenging, uncomfortable, stressful conversations that I had with my partner. One of the best and most important things that we can do moving forward to ease and calm this fear of relationships that we have is to really sort of dive into self-reflection, self-awareness, and emotional maturity and intelligence. That is the foundation, I think, of self-discovery, and in turn, you being able to show up in an authentic way around other people. And that is the foundation of genuine, healthy, emotional connections and relationships. Something that has been really helpful for me is self-acceptance. That has sort of developed throughout my healing journey as I've gotten to know my authentic self. And it's allowed me to show up as the person that I truly am in different settings, in different groups of people. And it is so much more sustainable when you let go of that hypervigilance and those people-pleasing tendencies, and you don't put so much pressure on every single interaction, like you have to be perfect, like you have to say the right thing, and you have to get this person to like you. You're neglecting yourself in so many ways in doing that. And so we sort of have to get to this point where we realize our trauma first and foremost, and we start to take the steps to understand how it's affected us. And from there, I came to a point where I realized, I don't know who I am. What is my sense of self? Where is my identity? I didn't feel a connection between the person that I was on the surface and my true self, because it had been so long that I had been in touch with her that we had completely just distanced ourselves from each other. And it's a consistent sort of evolution, I think, this process of self-discovery, because you find yourself in new and different experiences and relationships that resurface old memories and emotions that now you're facing as an adult, as someone who's realized your trauma, who maybe has a bit more self-awareness and emotional maturity. And you can look at these things through a much more objective lens. I think that can be one of the biggest challenges in healing and in relationships, is sort of viewing things not emotionally, but objectively. We've been conditioned to view life through a lens of trauma and survival and self-protection. And while at times this can be helpful to you, it can drastically hinder otherwise great, genuine, healthy connections and relationships. With that, I think I'm going to be wrapping up this week's podcast episode. It was such a joy to sit back down with you and to talk about this. I'm so looking forward to next week's episode already. I don't even know what it's going to be about, but I'm just happy to be back here, and I hope you are too. So if you enjoyed this week's episode, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you're listening on Spotify, please be sure to leave us a rating. I'll be back next week with another episode of It's Not Normal, the podcast.